Okay, so in case people didn't get the source sheet, even though I'll share it one time here. 1 second, chat. Okay, that should be the source sheet in case people want it. The main thing we'll need today is a Tanakh, but I have a little outline I shared on my source sheet. Let me put up my screen and we get started. We need to, how do we do this here? Okay, there we are. Share screen. There we go. And okay, so welcome back. Early Prophets, one book, one theme. Here's class number 15. And last week we talked about Eliel, what made Eliel special, why he stopped the rain, and why his big fight with Izebel, and why Achav was such a good king for the people, and why Eliel tried to surgically get rid of Izebel and keep Achav, and hopefully bring the people back to God. And pretty much we'll see today why things failed. And today we do the transition from Elisha, and we'll see, especially today, Eliel has many stories of what's called Bidat Adin. He stops rain, people die. He brings fire, 50 died. Another, let's see, three, one after the other, the fire coming and killing people. And basically, if I want to sort of maybe compare it to Beit Shammai, but Eliel he's harsh. And Elisha, on the flip side, is going to be Mr. Nice Guy in most of the stories. And that contrast must have some meaning, and we'll try to deal with that by the end of this year. So my little introduction. So we've studied the opening closing sections of Menachem, and actually, am I in the right source sheet? Make sure I got the right one. Okay, we're good. With the same introduction as last week, we're going to do Eliel and Elisha, the middle of the book, and why we focus now more on prophecy than kings. Okay, so just again, our timeline, which we talked about many times, and we're talking about the time period of Eliel and Elisha, which is the rise of Achav and the United Kingdom with Yehoshaphat, which will later lead to the revolt of Yehu, which hopefully we'll get to today, and then everything falling apart, and then the rise of power again of Yoash and Yerovam ben Yoash, when the house of Yehu finally recovers and things become great again over here. So I want to begin today with the discussion, which might go off track a little bit. You'll see why. Okay, I want to have a quick discussion over different types of Nevi'im. Now, let me stop my share because I want to discuss something. There's been I've been listening because it's been Zmanim, a lot of time to fix things up in the house and listening to Torah Motion Shiurim and all kinds of Shiurim. And everyone's talking about Sefer Devarim, Parshat Devarim, Sefer Devarim. And in academia, in modern stuff, in religious stuff, everyone talks about how Sefer Devarim is Moshe Rabbeinu's sort of take on Chumash, beginning of Torah Shabbat Peh. You've heard things like that? Moshe's explanation and things like that. So it always drives me. I'll try to be careful, but I'm using it as an introduction to understand why Moshe's prophecy is different than everyone else's. Chumash is different because basically Chumash is building a concept. Nevi'im is maintenance. The very concept of God entering an eternal covenant with the people and the goals of that people, the land set aside, the purpose of the people, and how to make that happen, that's Chumash. That's establishing something. Once it's established, it needs maintenance. The job of Nevi'im is to guide history, not to predict events, but to guide it, to make sure the goals of Chumash are fulfilled. And therefore, in Chumash, the main theme is establishing a nation with an eternal covenant with God, with a purpose, with its impact on humanity in general. That's exactly what that theme is. That's a long discussion. But it's setting the stage where if it had been executed properly, had Am Yisrael come out of Egypt and settled the land properly and built up the nation the way Sefer Devarim envisions, etc., then we could accomplish our job, and the job of the Nevi'im to make sure it goes in the right direction. But again, Chumash is always warning us: if we do a bad job, God will have to punish us, and if we do a good job, He'll reward us. That was Parshat Ekev over and over again. In Ot Tochachot. But the Nevuah of Chumash is primarily about establishing a nation, and therefore it's not a question of Moshe Rabbeinu was a higher madrega than other Nevi'im. Moshe Rabbeinu was commissioned to be the liaison that transfers the words of God about starting up a nation. And that's why his Nevuah is so essential and important. Now, once Chumash is done, there's no reason for new concepts and new laws, but rather the job of the Nevi'im is to keep it going. Now, Sefer Yoshua, I could make a little bit of a change because Sefer Yoshua is fulfilling the original goal of Chumash. Sefer Yeshua should have been a Sefer Bamidbar. So that's why Yeshua is either the last book of Chumash or the first book of Nevi'im. We did a whole series on that in the beginning of the series. Now, why is that important? In Sefer Dvarim, I want to begin with the famous Machloket Rashi Ramban on what the word Dvarim means. Anyone remember? Remember Elad Dvarim? How does Rashi understand the word Dvarim? Anyone remember? It's like famous Rashi. And Rashi follows Unklos. Dvarim doesn't mean words, it means rebuke. Give me a pasuk from Hosea. Sometimes Dvarim means words of rebuke, like I'm speaking to you. Harsh words. And therefore, Rashi is highlighting that in this book will be much rebuke that Moshe gave the people. Ibn Ezra and Ramban say Dvarim are like Aserta Dvarim. Not only that, but are words of God, commandments of God. And the main topic of the book are God's commandments. Now, it turns out that both of them are correct. Why? Because in the book, in Moshe Rabbeinu's speeches, we have lots of rebuke and we have lots of laws. But what's the difference between them? The laws that Moshe is teaching, right? It's not Moshe's understanding of the laws. It's not Moshe's take, Moshe's add-ons. Right? It's Moshe is repeating a set of laws that he received in Har Sinai in the first 40 days. That's explicit. Moshe says it in chapter 5 over and over again, all through the book, in chapter 4 in the introduction. The laws that Moshe teaches in Sefer Dvarim, according to Moshe Rabbeinu, according to Chumash, and according even to Sefer Shemot, when Moshe went up to Har Sinai for the first 40 days, he needs a set of laws that are going to turn a nation of slaves into a nation representing God. So I need a set of laws that are going to guide our national behavior and make us a nation representing God. It's the most important book of Chumash. It's so important it gets its own book. But the laws were given together with the Ten Commandments before the sin of the golden calf. In the very beginning, and they come part and parcel with the Ten Commandments. They're how to begin a nation. And 90% of laws in Devarim we don't find in any other book. They were given to Moshe in the first 40 days. They were taught to the people after we get the second Luchot, when we reestablish the Brit. The reader of Chumash hasn't seen them yet. So Moshe Rabbeinu repeats the laws that he taught, and as he repeats the laws, he adds rebuke based on the 40 years of experience. And that's where everything gets mixed up. But Moshe is adding, which Moshe should add as a leader, he rebukes the people. Remember what happened to Miriam. Remember your 40 years in the desert. Remember, your experience with. Remember all these things that happened. Remember we read this week, you were rebellious against God from the time I know you, and you went through all things. Tavira, Masam, Rivam, Raglim. That's rebuke that Moshe is giving. That's why should Moshe say that on his own? But Moshe is not going to machadesh. He's not going to come up with new commandments that God never thought of or God didn't give him. Moshe Rabbeinu is simply saying, and he says over and over again. In fact, if I just take a quick look at the end of the main speech, just put it here I'll do it in Hebrew because it's easier. And end of Perek Chavav when the speech ends. Remember, Hayom Hazeh, on this day, what's he say? Hashem Elokecha mitzavcha lasot achukim elev et mishpatim. Hashem your God. Remember Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hashem Elokeinu. The phrase Hashem Elokecha, Hashem our God means Hashem our boss is all through Sefer Dvarim because that's the covenantal commitment to God. So Hashem is commanding you keeping all these laws, keep them with all your heart. Then you took upon yourself, he's your God, to follow his ways, to obey him. God took upon himself that you'll be Isam Skulad, like he told you at Har Sinai, to keep all of his commandments, to put you in a leadership position above the nations, for God's glory and renown, etc. And that will make you an Am Kadosh, like he said in Har Sinai, Vatem Tulim, Mamlechet Kohanim, V'goy Kadosh. So if I follow the laws of Sefer Devarim, that will turn us into a nation representing God. Therefore, it's called like a recipe, a Torah, a set of laws that will make us a nation that will sanctify God. The laws of the book are 40 years old, and they have nothing to do with that. Nothing's changing in these laws. Adrabah. Laws later in the second half of Shemot with the Mishkan, maybe laws of Korbanot like Chatat and Shlamim, Chatat and Hasham, might be a result of events in the desert after Chet HaEgel and Mirat HaRachamim. But the core laws of Devarim, the central place of worship, the shoftim, the judicial system, the economic system, marriage laws, divorce laws, laws of the marketplace, laws about going to war, they're all 40 years old. And there's no reason to change them now, because the original plan was to go to Israel right away. The first speech talks about why it's been 40 years. Now, why am I pointing it out? Because we're going to see different types of nevuah in Nevi'im, and Elisha and Eliyahu will be different, special category of Nevi'im, very different than Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu. We'll see in a minute. But I want to make that clear distinction between the job of Moshe Rabbeinu is the liaison that sets up the religion, that sets up this concept of a nation with a covenant with God, and he's the one who's able to transmit that to the people. But it's not Moshe's job to make up new laws, to machadesh laws and things like that. And Moshe says in the speech over and over again, in the speech are laws that God gave me. In fact, if we go back to Perek Hey, where the speech began, remember he says, listen to all the laws I'm teaching you today. They're part of a covenant. Hashem Elokeinu made a brit with us at Har Sinai, and then was face to face, but you got scared. He quotes the Ten Commandments. And then he says, you all got scared, and you begged me. Remember that you go and listen to the laws. And what did God tell Moshe Rabbeinu? Tell the people, go back to your tents. And Pasach Chav Zayin, you stay here with me, and I'm going to tell you the mitzvah, the chukim mishpatim, that you have to teach them to keep in the land. That's what God told Moshe on Har Sinai, right after the Dibrot, when the people got scared. And the speech begins in chapter 6. The laws begin. What's coming up is the commandment and the laws, chukim mishpatim, which God commanded me to teach you to keep in the land. It's explicit. And Moshe said, then, the laws I taught you, they're directly from God. And that's the Rambam's principle of Emunah, that we don't say Moshe made them up, but Moshe says God told him a law, it's from God. And it just, that's why it goes, when people say that Moshe Rabbeinu is interpreting the laws, giving you, that's not what Moshe is giving Musar. But he's saying exactly what I'm teaching you is what God told me to teach you. And 90% of these laws are what are the reader of Chumash never saw them before, even though they were given before. The question is, why are certain laws earlier? So Parsha Mishpatim comes with on the same day as the Ten Commandments. It's like sort of sound bites that lead into Sefer Devarim. What laws are in Vayikra? That's the whole topic in Vayikra and Bamidbar. But the main law section of Chumash that God gave Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai is Sefer Devarim. Now, why the Ten Commandments a little bit different? That's a share on the Ten Commandments, which is easy to explain. But that's the main thing I want to get across as far as the Nevuat Moshe. And I hope that's clear. Later people can ask me questions on it. But I think, there's so many shiurim that come and say this is like, it's a review of Chumash and Moshe is giving his take on things. It's simply not true. That's all. What can I say? It just maybe it might be, I understand where they're saying it, but it's not in Chumash, put it that way. Now, and the whole thing, now that they're going to Israel, things change. They were going to Israel 40 years ago. So the laws don't need to change because they're going to Israel. The original laws were going to Israel. Things change because of Midat HaRachamim. Things change because of their sins in the desert. But the laws aren't going to change. The rebuke will be different. Anyway, that was my 2 cents on Nevuah. Now, why is that important? When we talk about Nevi'im, I want to put 2 categories of Nevi'im for 2 different types of Jewish education. One are Nevi'im to establish a belief in God. Number one, that there's one God and he exists and he has a special relationship with you. There's a God who created everything, the existence of God, and he's involved in our lives. In all, not just our lives, but all civilization. Okay? That's to know Vidatem ki ani Hashem, to know that God exists. To do that, for people who believe in many gods or don't believe in God or whatever it is, I need miracles. We have Nevi'im sometimes doing miracles. The goal of the miracle is the buy-in, it's the jumpstart to get people into the system. Now, once I believe in God and I believe in the covenant with God, there's another question: how to be a good worker. But the first day, am I a committed Jew? And am I a Jew committed to keeping Torah mitzvot? Am I part of a covenant? Do I realize I have a responsibility to be a member of God's people? And then you can ask the question, once I take that responsibility, how do I fulfill that responsibility? How do I get my job done? Now, therefore, one type of nevuah is building the original belief in God. Moshe Rabbeinu has to do miracles, right, to get people. That turns into the first statement in what we call the Dibrot. And the purpose of all the miracles coming out of the desert is to establish that Vayaminu b'Hashem Moshe Avdo. Once I enter a covenant to be God's people, now I need a Navi to teach me the laws of how to get my job done. One's making a commitment to be a worker, and the other is how to get your job done. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu does both. He does the miracles coming out of Egypt, and then from Har Sinai becomes the teacher and the rebuker. But he's got to keep the people in line. But he does both. When I get to later Nevi'im, when I get to Nevi'im, like in our books of Nevi'im Rishonim, when I get to Eliyahu, we don't find Eliyahu teaching laws. He might have been doing it, but Eliyahu's main job in Tanakh is to return the people to a commitment to be God's people and not follow other gods. Why? Because thanks to Achav and Yezebel, Baal worship became super popular. It was because of the success of Achav's coalition with Sidon, the economic success, the military success, based on his political coalitions he made and his wise economic decisions. People got the impression that Baal service works. Now, it worked because it did work. But Eliyahu sees that's causing people to be less committed or not committed to God and start following cultures of other gods. And that's why Eliyahu blows the whistle and tries to explain to people, no, there isn't a Baal God. There's one God. And to accomplish that, he stops the rain. He's using miracles. Now, was it his idea? That's what Chazal understand. And God agreed to it. But it was his idea, and then God sort of, we'll see in a minute, has to teach him a lesson. But Eliyahu's intention of stopping the rain is a tool that he's using to rebuild the very essence of a belief in God and a commitment to be God's people, that there's one God as opposed to believing in many gods. One. Elisha sort of has to pick up the pieces that were ruined by Eliyahu's Midat Hadin. In other words, people might have believed in God with Eliyahu, but they hate him because he caused so much damage. Elisha is going to be the Navi, unlike any other Navi, being Mr. Nice Guy, helping people. And that's the question in education. How do you build belief in God? By going around helping people, doing mitzvot? How do you get people to buy into the system of being in the service of God, of believing God? By doing acts of kindness and being forgiving and just helping people make a living, give them food, stopping people from suffering, or by being mean and harsh and punishment. It's every parent has the same dilemma: how to bring up the child the best way. And usually, no matter what you do, it doesn't work. But it's both approaches are logical. By the time I get to Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Amos, Hosea, Micha, etc., the people are God's people, but they're not keeping the religion properly. They believe in God, or at least a lot of believe in God, but the way they apply that belief in God, their understanding of God, becomes like idol worship. Their understanding of God becomes God working for them instead of they working for God. Remember the full of corruption? They think they can bring korbanot and get away with murder and things like that. Now, those Nevi'im don't need to do miracles because people believe in God. The question is, what's the proper way to serve Him? And how's your relationship with God work? So that was my general introduction to understand why Eliyahu and Elisha are different. And it's thanks to the success of Achav and the coalition he makes with Yehoshaphat and the siksuk, the prosperity and the growth that's happening at the time of Achav for the first time since the time of Shlomo. Everything is so good. Who are the people to attribute to? And the problem is they attribute to Achav and to Yezebel and to Baal worship and not to our God. And that's why Eliyahu has to come in and blow the whistle and do something harsh. But the harsh approach that worked, that was hoping to get rid of Yezebel, we had to pay a heavy price for. It made the people angry with God. And Elisha is going to have to go and fix that. Now, we'll get to a story. We'll get to it soon. But the best example of the nation being fed up with their Nevi'im is when there's a siege on Shomron, remember? And the king wants to kill the Navi who brought her upon them. Notice he's going to blame everything. I think it's going to be Achav's second son. Which one? Yehoram, I think. Or not Chaziel, I'm sorry. Chaziel is going to come and say, one of the kings is going to come and say, he's going to swear, I'm going to kill Elisha. He's going to blame everything on Elisha. We'll get to it in Paragimel. But we'll explain how that's going to work. Maybe it's not the Paragimel. I'll find what Parag. It's in the sources in a minute. But I just want to show you that the people believe in Nevi'im that they have superpowers, that they're holy people or they're special people, but they want the rabbis or these prophets to help them and not punish them. Okay, so with that in mind, I want to go and review the stories of Eliyahu and Elisha and try to find a pattern without reading all the stuff inside. Let me check the chat real fast. Chat is Sorshises. Okay, good. Shema, pay attention. Okay, very good. Excellent. Now, back to no questions on that so far? Hope that was clear. Now, let's get to work on our source sheet. Okay, share screen, and here we are. Okay. So what we're doing, we discussed different types of Nevi'im, okay, the miracle workers, proving God exists, and guidance, how to serve God properly, and how it relates to our study of Eliyahu and Elisha. Now, in the division between Menachem Aleph and Menachem Bet is what do you call it? Almost, remember, it's one book, which is simply too long. So in Tirgum HaShivim, in the Septuagint, they divide it into two halves. But we just do it for convenience sake. But it's not each, it's one book with two parts to it. It's not two different books. So again, we talk about the first 16 chapters were about kings, and the focus of Eliyahu began in chapter 17. It was the relation with Achab. Now, what I want to point out here is that, here we go. I have the review here. And then in Menachem Bet, we have the first 10 chapters, or actually the first 8 chapters with Elisha. And starting chapter 9, we have Elisha transition, and then everything about the kings again from chapter 10. Okay. What happens first in chapter 17? I'm going to do a quick review, and then we'll go through a couple of the psukim. As soon as Eliyahu makes his gzerah, his decree to stop the rain, it's interesting in chapter 17, God sends Eliyahu to Nachal Kri, to a place where he needs water from the valley, and then the water dries out, and Eliyahu himself is in need of water and of food, and then he sends him to a lady in Sidon, in Lebanon, right, who's going to feed him. Now, that can't be by chance. Why is God sending Eliyahu to a lady in Sidon to give him food? Who can tell me what's going on? What seems to be going on? If it's not just coincidental. Again, and why does Nabi have to tell us that story? Anyone want to suggest something? Where are we?
Yeah, he wants to prove, he wants him to become realistic about what he created, to be a part of it and not to be dependent on miracles from Hashem for him to sustain. So he should be able to really by himself to feel what's happening there.
Yeah, but we'd like to go nowadays post-traumatic growth. If you, in fact, it's the theme of basically Brit Ben term as well. To become God's people, we had to go through suffering in Egypt to make sure not to do that to others. So God is, in a certain way, again, you can question, I'm not saying I know for sure why God's doing something, but if I'm asking myself, why does Sefer Malachim bother to tell us this personal story about God sending Eliyahu to some place where he's going to run out of water, and then sending him up to Lebanon to get food from a lady in Sidon? Of course, it's a Jewish lady who's living in Sidon, but that can't not be connected to the fact that that's what Eliyahu does to the people, because the people run out of water, and when you run out of water, you run out of food, and you're suffering. And what did Achav do to save his economy? He went to Sidon and married Izebel, the daughter of the king of Sidon. But his goal wasn't he was short on wives. It was rather he was making a political treaty to help his people. He meant well. So in order for Eliyahu to appreciate the damage he's done and the people suffering, I think it's important for God to put him through that experience. Now, at the very end, we have a strange story where that lady who was living a sort of a normal life, after Eliyahu comes, her child gets sick, and she thinks he's dead. What does she think? Oh, this rabbi came, and now there's Shekhinah in the area, and now, God's too close to them, and you get punished. And she blames the death of the child, but she thought the death of the child, on Eliyahu, and Eliyahu brings the child back to life. Now, anyone want to suggest what that might be representing? A near-death situation, and then coming back to life?
Bringing back the economy to what it was, and stopping the famine or the rain to stop.
Yeah, basically, you need when someone is close to death or dying, the first thing you have to do is revive them, bring them back to life. Worry about the rest later. Okay. Anyway, so that's the story there. Now, then we get to chapter 18. Let's go back to our source sheet. That's all in chapter 17. In chapter 18, there's 3 years of famine and comes the big showdown. And that's a chapter where we find the question is, who's Ocher Yisrael? And we find about this guy, Ovadia. We talked a little bit of Ovadia. Just to appreciate Achav's coalition, let me open up my Tanakh for a second and show you some interesting things about Ovadia. Where are we? Share screen and Navi. We'll open up English Hebrew. Here. In chapter 17, he goes to here. Where's that? Chapter 18. What are we in now? Chapter 18, okay? So here. Now we have a side point that the Navi is telling us that the author of Menachem is giving us information to follow the rest of the story. Now, okay, and this is the header of the story. Eliyahu now is going to have the showdown with Achav, okay? But the famine is very strong in Shomron. Things are really bad. Achav is going to call Avadiyahu, who's in charge of the household, like he's like prime minister or an important person in the government. And Ovadia was a man fearing him. He was a religious person, Ovadia, but he's still in Achav's government. Because he's in an important position. Remember, we have regular religious people in the government. But they put up with Izebel. We have many times in Israel government, you have a far left wing, and together with religious parties, but for coalition reasons, they're all in the same government together. Now, when Izebel got rid of the Nevi'im, now why was Izebel getting rid of the Nevi'im? The Nevi'im were complaining about Izebel and Avodat Baal and all this new influence. Izebel had to get rid of them. So Ovadia, who was in a position of leadership, what did he do? He did some special funding, right? He had what's called what they call coalition funds, if you know what's happening in Israel. But Ovadia took some funding and took care of 100 Nevi'im, hid them, 50 here, 50 there, and kept them alive. It was sort of going against official government policy. Ovadia, under the table, was taking care of small groups of Nevi'im, keeping them alive, because he cared about them. And therefore, Ovadia thinks thinks he deserves, he doesn't want to get punished. Okay. So Achav tells Ovadia, let's divide the country in half. You look one half, I'll look in the other half. And let's see if we can find a little bit of food, at least to keep some of our animals alive. Okay. And they're basically searching the land to find any sources of food for their animals, for their livestock, etc. And in the middle of this, what happens? Ovadia happens to bump into Eliyahu, right? He sees him and he falls on his face. Remember who falls? Ovadia falls on his face, says, is this my master Eliyahu? Right? And Eliyahu goes and tells him, go tell your master, hey, I'm coming. Now, what's Ovadia say? If I go tell Achav, I found you and I didn't kill you, I didn't bring you in, he'll kill me. He says, what did I do wrong, Ovadia tells Eliyahu, that you're going to give my boss Achav a reason to kill me? Right? And then he swears in God's name, he says, listen carefully how powerful Achav is. If there wasn't a kingdom or a nation, right, that my master Achav didn't send to look for you, right? And they had to say no, and he made them swear if they find Eliyahu to turn him in. That shows you the position Achav was in the coalition with other nations around him. Okay? And now you're telling me, Ovadia says, go tell my master Eliyahu is here. Okay? It says, you're going to go and fly away somewhere. It seems like Eliyahu was known for that, disappearing in the middle of nowhere. And he tells, I'll tell Achav, and Achav will kill me. He says, I've been from since the day I was born, from my youth. Okay. And then he says, didn't you know about all the things I did when Izebel killed the Nevi'im? Now remember this. We'll see later on, many Nevi'im were killed by Izebel's policy. And that's why there'll be a lot of amonot, a lot of widows who were once married to Nevi'im, who Elisha has to take care of later in Menachem Bet, we'll see. Okay. And he hid 15 Nevi'im, 150 Nevi'im here, 15 Nevi'im there, and took care of them with lechem and mayim. And now again, you're telling me to go to Eliyahu, and Eliyahu says, he swears also, don't worry, I'll take care of you. I'll take care of it. Okay? So Ovadia tells Achav, and then here, when Achav sees Eliyahu, what's he say? Achav tells him, Hatazeh Ocher Yisrael. See, Ocher means you're the troublemaker. You're ruining Israel. Okay? And what's Eliyahu say? I'm not that was my title from last week. Who's the villain? Who's the hero? He says, and Eliyahu tells him back, I'm not the one who made Israel bad. you and your household, because you followed Baal worship. And now let's have a showdown. Then we have the famous showdown on her, and that's already the Haftarah for Parshat Kitisa, I think. Okay. Anyway, so that's the famous one where Eliyahu wins the showdown. God answers his korban, and when the people all say Hashem Hu Elokim, we're going to use that for our Elul series. We're going to go back to the story more in detail and try to find the deeper meaning of Hashem Hu Elokim. And it'll be important for Elul because I think the highlight of the high holidays, the highlight of Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, is at Nila. And when we scream out Hashem Hu Elokim 7 times, that must be something really important. So to appreciate that in our Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur liturgy, we'll go back to the story. That'll be our segue into the high holiday season in the Elul program starting in 2 weeks. Now, Eliyahu now commands, let's catch all these Nivei Baal and we can punish them. Okay? And basically does a bloodbath into Nachal Kishon. And then he tells Achav, eat and drink, because now you see it's thundering, there'll be a lot of rain coming. And Achav eats and drinks, and everyone's happy. And this should be, what's Eliyahu hoping for? Let me clear this part out. It starts raining, and what's Eliyahu's big hope? In theory, Eliyahu could have done a miracle and had fire come down and kill Izebel as well, right? But Izebel isn't at the showdown. Izebel's in the capital city. What does Eliyahu want to happen? Who can tell me? Right? What's Eliyahu hoping for after the showdown with the Nevei Baal? What's Achav going to do?
That Achav should kill Izebel.
At least to give her a get or something. Send her back to Tzidon. Maybe not to kill her. She's a Bat Melech. But get rid of her, right? I don't need her anymore. The whole reason we brought her in was for economic reasons. I don't need her for rain anymore. We have our God. That's what Eliyahu was hoping for. And what happened? It didn't happen. Now we have to read now what happened next. It's like really important. Watch what happens next. We'll go back and share our screen. We're in chapter 19 now. In chapter 19, okay. Achav tells Izebel everything that happened. Got it? Okay. And Izebel sends a message saying, follow to Eliyahu saying, okay, Ko Yasun Elohim. See, he's the name of his own God, okay? Yasun. Tomorrow you're going to be like one of them. Basically, she sends out a death warrant. Now, has Izebel ever killed Nevim before? That's her pastime, isn't it? Wait, I didn't share my screen, did I? My mistake. Share screen. Sorry about that. Share screen. Okay, sorry about that. Here. Achab tells Izebel everything he did. She sends with a death warrant, and she's killed Nevim before. Now, look at the next line. Okay? Izebel sends out the message, tomorrow I'm going to make what happened to you, what happened to them. Basically, I'll kill you. Bayar, what's that mean, Bayar? We're talking about Eliyahu. What did Eliyahu see?
He was scared and he saw.
What did he see? He didn't see anything. The see means like to understand. Like we say in English, you see what I mean? Or Vayar ha'am ki boshesh Moshe, the people saw that Moshe is coming down. They don't see. They reach a conclusion. What does Eliyahu see? That no one comes to support him. And no one's getting rid of Izebel. Eliyahu sees basically that he failed. It didn't work. You'll see in a minute why this is so important. Okay? Vayakom, vayelech nafsho. He gets up and runs away. He has no supporters. Izebel is still in power. You think after this thing she'd resign, she'd take responsibility, whatever it is. No, she stays in power. She doesn't admit she's wrong, and the people continue to support her. Okay, and he runs away because who can tell me why is Eliyahu so depressed? What's that? Vayavol Beersheba. Okay, he leaves his nar there, almost like Agar, and he goes in the desert, a distance from Beersheba, sits down thing, and he wants to die. Vayishaut nafsho lamut. Okay, and what's he tell God? He tells God, take me away. Right? No, it's Izebel wanted to kill him. See the wording? Izebel said, "Kate machar asim et nafshecha kenefesh achad mehem." And what does Eliyahu ask God to do? Vayishaut nafsho lamut. Okay. And when he says, "Vayomer Rav ata Hashem kach nafshi ki lo tov anochi me'avotai." Who can tell me why is Eliyahu so depressed and why does he want to die?
Maybe he thinks God failed him in
Did
this.
God fail him?
In the sense,
No, he failed God.
He failed God. It didn't work.
well,
And he used his he made a gzera and caused thousands of people to die, probably ruined the country, and it didn't help.
right.
And now he's taking responsibility for all the death he caused.
Ah,
He failed. He admits his failure. That's what makes him great. Now he admits his failure and says, "I'm no better than my predecessors. They also didn't get the job done." And basically, Eliyahu is realizing Midat Adin didn't work. Now, what's Eliyahu going to do? God won't let him die, because what's Eliyahu need to do? He's got to fix the mess he made, pretty much. Now, God's going to accept his resignation, but give him several things to do, right, to get rid of. Now, at the end of the, who knows what's going to happen at the end of the parak? He's going to go to Har Sinai, isn't he? We'll have a parallel to Yetziat Mitzrayim, up 40 days and 40 nights until we get to Har Sinai. In Har Sinai, instead of God being, B'kolot uvrakim v'anan kabed al har, we'll have what's called Kod Madaka. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. We have an inverse of Mamad Har Sinai. 40 days before, and then Har Sinai. At Har Sinai, instead of rain and instead of thunder and lightning and fire, God is simply called him up. It's like a small little sound. There's no Barash Hashem, Lo Kol Hashem. All the things from Har Sinai are missing. Only Kol Madaka, whatever say that in English, a small little voice. And God accepts Eliyahu's resignation, but he gives him three things to do. Who remembers the three things Eliyahu has to do?
He has to anoint the king in Aram.
Okay, new king. Who's that king going to be?
Which he doesn't do.
Hazael Melech is going to be king in Aram. Continue.
Right. He's to appoint Elisha as his successor.
He
doesn't. And then a third thing I forgot.
The king
to anoint another king.
Yeah, another king, to make Yehu the king in Yehuda, who's already a known general.
And he doesn't do that either.
He doesn't do that either. The only thing he does is Elisha is going to make Hazael the king, and the Talmid of Elisha is going to make Yehu the king. Now, when all those three things happen, right? By the time Yehu is king and does his coup d'etat, got it? Yehu's coup d'etat is a people's revolt against the house of Achav, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What happens as soon as Yehu's coup d'etat works? What's the first thing Yehu does? Anyone remember?
Yeah, it destroys Bet Achav.
But who's the first one to go?
Achav's son.
And Izebel.
And Izebel.
He tosses her out the window. And the dogs eat her up. And who kills Izebel? Not just Yehu by himself.
The people.
It's a people's revolt. You see where we're going in a nutshell? It took me 20 years, but Yehu, God basically achieved the same result through natural means. What did Eliyahu want to do? Eliyahu wanted surgically to get rid of Izebel, to take Izebel out of the country and get the people angry with Izebel and get rid of her. You follow? And we try to do it in a surgical, with Midat Adin. And what's God going to do? God's going to teach Eliyahu, let me show you how I run things. I'll get rid of Izebel. It'll happen through what? Through the people there'll be a people's revolt against the political leadership that's corrupt. Because Achav's kids are not like Achav. And there'll be a new king in Syria, right? Before Assad came in. There'll be a coup d'etat in Syria, there'll be a coup d'etat in Israel, there'll be classic political events happening. Armies being overturned or generals taking over armies. There'll be classic politics. By the time it's over, Izebel will be gone. But not with harsh miracles and stopping the rain, but you only see that if you have the ability to see the hand of God behind history, which Elisha is going to show the people. But when Elisha does, he'll do it. We'll see. Elisha will get it done, but in a kind of way. But all the three things that God tells Eliyahu to do are all going to ultimately achieve the same result, but it'll take a decade or two. Got the idea? That's what I want to show you. That's why I built up. That's why I went from from Eliyahu hoping after the showdown with the Baal, they get rid of all the people will get rid of Yezebel. It didn't happen, but it does happen some 20 years later. Because when the people revolt together with Yehu, boy, they get rid of Baal worship, don't they? And Yezebel and the whole group, and but that Baal is gone by then. But then it'll have a different result. We'll see. Already, that's the first thing I want to get across when in chapters 18. And let me go back to my outline real fast, and we'll see where we're going with this. Okay, so we have the showdown coming out chapter 18. In chapter 19, Yezebel's not impressed and orders Eliyahu's death. Eliyahu runs away. Chorev resigns. He gives him 3 commands: appoint King Chazal, king of Aram, Yehu, the king of Israel, and Elisha's successor in that order. And Eliyahu goes backwards. He starts with Elisha. Elisha is going to make Chazal the king, and the Talmid of Elisha is going to make Yehu king of Israel. Okay, and these events take a while till they all take place. Okay, what's interesting in chapter 20, a totally different story, a war between Syria and Israel. Things haven't changed much. We have the border between Israel and Syria. There's a state of war between them, with Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, and Achav, and they're fighting. And Achav wins the battles, thanks to who? Thanks to God. And now there's an anonymous Navi, which means we don't know his name. He's definitely, it doesn't say it's Eliyahu, and would say if it was Eliyahu, would say, but there's a Navi who comes and helps Achav in the battle and tells him, because it's a war almost, it's a military war, but the question is, whose God is stronger? This anonymous Navi is trying to get the people to believe in Hashem by helping them in military battle. And you see that to this day. You can have people who are not so committed to God. If you win a military victory in a relatively miraculous way or a semi-miraculous way, if God helps you in battle, if you're winning battle, that makes people committed to their God. Okay. So now back to so that's the first part. But the Navi's trying, it's another Navi trying to get the people back to supporting God. Now, now after that story, again, Eliyahu's not involved. In chapter 21, Achav is his critical sin, and that's the story of Navot HaKarmeli. I'm assuming you know the story in a nutshell. Achav wants a certain field, the guy doesn't want to sell it, and that's it. And he comes home, and his wife Yezebel tells him, "I'll show you how to run a kingdom." What do you mean? They say no to the king, and they do a terrible trick. And Achav is being punished for letting his wife do what she did, and that's going to be Achav's critical sin. That's the other sins he's done with Baal. Serving Baal, marrying Yezebel is understandable. He did it for the sake of Am Yisrael, but his behavior with Navot, that wasn't forgivable. And therefore, in the next chapter, he's going to find his death when he goes to war with against Aram. He dies in battle. Now, there's such a great story there, which we're not going to go into, where Yoshaphat and Achav go to battle against Syria. Okay, that shows you the coalition, and that's why Israel is so strong. But Achav, even though he's going to battle, he knows he sinned. Got it? He's worried about going to battle because he might die in battle. Because therefore, what does he do? He hides. Remember the battle? He doesn't dress up like the king. He has Yoshaphat dress up like the king. Now, it shows he had a bit of a guilty conscience, but who can tell me what's the logic of the enemy going for the king? It's clear to the enemy. The enemy has one goal. In fact, I think it says so. What's the goal of the enemy? If they're going to kill the king, what's that going to do?
Demoralizes the troops.
Not just demoralize the troops. Well, if the king's dead, what would the troops do?
Run away. There's no leader.
Not only because there's no leader, it depends what type of war you're fighting. If you're fighting a war of survival, if there's an existential threat to your country, right, and your leader dies, what do? The existential is still there. You get a new leader, you follow? And you continue the war. You don't stop the war because your leader died. Because if your leader is going to war that's not existential, meaning he wants to widen his borders, or there isn't consensus about whether we need to go to war or not. That was because Achav's going to war, which is not necessary. He wants to expand his border a little bit, take a little more land. The people aren't behind it. Why is the army fighting? Because the king said so. You have to follow orders. But when the people lose trust in their leader, they don't fight the same way. We know that from ancient military history to modern day times. In other words, the people have to be convinced that this battle is existential. That's why in any army that really gives its hardest has to have that feeling that without this battle, our country falls apart. And that motivates people to fight. If they kill Achav, there'll be no reason to fight anymore because the motivation is not there in the first place. The only motivation is the king says so, we have to follow orders. But they really don't want to fight. And therefore, the second the king would die, the battle would be over. And therefore, the strategy of Aram is go for the king. Achav is aware of that, and therefore, what does he do? He dresses up, he hides. But there has to be a king in battle. Says Yoshaphat, you dress up like the king, because you're a king anyhow. Now, why is Yoshaphat safer? Because Yoshaphat's from, got it? And got to protect him. Yeah, I want you to understand Achav's understanding of God. He's afraid of his punishment. Like, you know, God, you believe in God, but you want to keep your distance. You're sort of placing your bets a little bit. So he's going to hide to save his life. But he's going to hope that Yoshaphat will have better luck than he will. And guess what happened? You know what happened? Right? Sort of by accident, Achav got killed in battle. Wasn't a stray arrow that got him? And then the word got out that the king was gone, and the battle stopped. Let's take a look at it inside. I think it's the last chapter in. Do I have it right? Share my screen. In chapter, right, it should be chapter 22.
22.
Yeah, 22. Here we are. So here we go. Okay. The third year, Yoshaphat due to go to war. Here. This is a war of expansion, isn't it? Hey, we should take over Transjordan. Ramot Gilad is in Jordan, northern part of Jordan today. Hey, that land belongs to us. We should take it. Okay? We're being too quiet. We should go and take it from Aram. He tells Yoshaphat, let's make a coalition and go to war. And Yoshaphat gives a famous line, Kamoni kamocha, kami kamecha, kusai kusasecha. We're in this together. You see the friendship between the two kings, and that's the reason for their military growth and their economic growth because of this coalition with Yoshaphat and with Izebel. Okay. Now Yoshaphat says, before we go to war, let's check with a Navi, and this is a famous story. Menachem Yisrael gets all the Navim together, and he has always yes men. Why call those yes? You have 400 Navim ready to sign like any advertisement in the paper. Any political, religious advertisement. I have a couple hundred rabbis ready to sign, no matter, as long as it's right wing. We have plenty of rabbis saying, go for it. Got to be with you. So, and then there's always one left wing rabbi that no one wants to listen to. So Yoshaphat is worried. Too many people are saying the same thing. There's too many yes men here, Yoshaphat says. Isn't there any other Navi here? We can check. Isn't like a better Navi? And Achav says, oh, there's one more Navi. What's his name? Michal ben Yimla, okay, and but Achav says, I hate the guy. Why? Because I don't like his predictions. He's too left. I don't like what he says, so I never call him in. I don't like other opinions. So Yoshua said, call him, okay. So he calls what he called. So the king calls him in, and guess what? Michal ben Yim says? It says this. If you learned Baba Kama in the Zikin, what would be the difference? So Tzidkiah ben Kenania was one of the Nevi'ei Sheker. Right? He makes karnei barzel. Those are karnei barzel. What's that in English? Horns made out of steel, like how? You're gonna win the war. Anyone? What halacha that Chazal learned from here? Remember elu tanagach. That's in the Gichaz mishum karnav Karen. In the Zikin, assault of an animal. It's called Karen. When you learn the Zikin, and any yeshiva bacher knows this pasuk, not because they learned this parak, because they know this pasuk Be'elu Tamagachat Aram. Okay, and all the Nevi'im say, yeah, we're going to win the war. Right, go to war, go for it. Okay, And then in the meantime, Michiyahu comes and tells the people, what do you call it? Say the same thing. And he sarcastically says, what do you call it? Do we go to war with him? And he says, what do you call it? And he says, no, he makes fun of them. And he's saying it he's saying the same thing. He's saying it sarcastically. And Achav catches on that he's making fun of him. And then he tells him, what I really see? I see that all the people are running away from the mountains. The army's scattered. Okay. Why? He says, I see all of Israel, the whole army, running away on the mountains like sheep without a leader. Why? Because there's no master. Right? And everyone goes back home. You see what's going on? The Navi sees you go for the leader, no one's going to fight anymore. And Achav tells you, I told you so. He has all these bad predictions. Okay. And then he explains why all these false Navim. He says, God's helping you make this mistake. Okay. Who's going to trick Achav? Who's going to seduce Achav to go to war and die? Okay. And this Ruach, Chazal say the Ruach of Navot, it was a sin with Navot that caused Achav's death. It says, I'll be a Ruach Sheker in all of his advisors. And anyway, that's the famous story. Okay. And then what happens? Because of this Nevuah, so they put the Navi into house arrest until Tziva's prediction came true. And what do you call it? So they go together to Ramot Gilad. And Melech Yisrael tells Yoshaphat, Hitchapes, means you put on your battle gear, okay, and go into war, and I'll wear your clothes. We'll change uniforms, okay? And they switch their the clothing, okay? Now, what did Melech Aram say? Tziva Sari HaRechev, he told his commanders to do what? Lo tilachamu et katon vat gadol kim Melech Yisrael levado. That's his military strategy we talked about. Hope you're aware of that. I'm sure we've read this story before. Most people don't understand it. The military side behind it. There's tons of it's so unfortunately it's so true to life in modern day Israel as well. When the army has to feel that the war they're fighting is not a war of expansion, but a war that's important. It's existential, and you have to trust in the leaders. Okay, so when Achav sees what do you call it? When this unit that was going for the king realized it's Yoshaphat and not Achav, right? He says they think it's Melech Yisrael. So Yoshaphat says, no, I'm not Achav. You got the wrong guy, right? So they leave him alone because they don't want to mess up with Yehuda, okay? And then by chance, a strange arrow, just happened to fall and hit Melech Yisrael by chance against on his armor, between his armor, and he dies on the chariot, right? So actually, he's dying in the chariot, pretending to be alive, okay? But his blood is falling onto the chariot, okay? And then the word gets out. Everyone got a text that what? Everyone go back home. The king's dead, right? And the king comes to Shomron, and he's buried in Shomron. And then when they wash the chariot from his blood, it goes onto the field of Navot that he stole from thanks to Izebel. Okay. So that's the end of Achav. Which if I'm going to end Melachim Aleph, I should end it here already, and then we add Yoshaphat at the end of the parak. But that's the end of Achav. Hope you appreciate the story. But I'm trying to show you in the story Achav's greatness, right? But you see in this final battle how he loses, how everything comes together for his going to war that we don't need, too much expansion, too much growth. But on the other hand, he was super successful, and his coalition together with Yehuda and Izebel was his key to his success. Now we only have time for one more short story. Didn't get anywhere as far as I wanted to today, but let me go back to my outline and get to my key point, and we'll finish this up next week. Achaziyahu dies, okay, but here Eliyahu is involved, and here's the story where Achaziyahu, Achav's son Achaziyahu, who now takes over, is ill, and he wants a mishbeach from a rabbi. He's not going to go to Eliyahu. Got it? Who's he go to? To Baal Zvuv, right? A god of Ekron. I'll tell you a family story. A little more. So Baal Zvuv is the god of Ekron. Remember you heard of that? Baal Zvuv, Elohei Ekron. Ekron is nowadays a city. It's a Plishti city in not too far from Yavne. There's a place called Ekron. It's a city in Israel today called Ekron. Right? Now, I grew up in Akron, Ohio. My father was a shul rabbi in Akron, Ohio. If you ever heard of the city, it's where LeBron James is from. And when my son was we were visiting my parents, in Akron, Ohio, coming out of shul, and zoning in Ohio, churches and shuls are like one area. So there's a shul on one corner, and there's a church on the other corner, across from the shul. So we come out of shul, and my son asked me, it was the first time in it, okay? He asked me, what shul is that? What shul, what's that? So I told him it's not a shul, it's a church. He goes, what's a church? It's a place of Avodah Zarah. It's a Makom Avodah Zarah. He says, Abba, is that Baal Zvuv? Because he knew Baal Zvuv at Leah Kron. So that was my fun story with my son. That was a long time ago. That was a cute little. It's so
what
did
did he say? I didn't understand what he.
He said in Tanakh, he was in Akron, Ohio, okay? And he knew it's Tanakh, like my kid. But he, from school, and he knows there was a king. There was Avodah Zarah called Baal Zvuv, which is probably a makeup name, okay? Who's the god of Ekron. The people in Ekron of the Plishti city worshipped the god named Baal Zvuv.
Right.
He was referred, and because he was the city of Ekron, he thought Ekron and Akron was the same city, the same idea. So he sees. I said that's the place of Avodah Zarah in Akron. So he said that must be Baal Zvuv. It was a great. How he put two and two together was cute. Anyway, that was my little family story. Now back to the shir. Back to okay. So Achav dies. I'm sorry. Achav's son dies, but when the word gets to Eliyahu, right? Achaziel goes and sends messengers, 50 people to kill the guy. And what happens? Eliyahu brings fire and kills the 50. Another 50 come, he kills them again. The last 50, they get the message and they beg for lives. But that's a famous story again. Eliyahu using fire to defeat idol worshippers. Now, the famous story in chapter 2, I guess we'll have to do it more in detail next week, when Elisha succeeds Eliyahu. I'm assuming you know the story because I think it's an Haftarah. I think it's an Haftarah. I forget which one. I forget whether Perek Bet is Haftarah or not. But what happens in a nutshell is that they're leaving, and there's chatter, in the yeshiva world, among the Bnei Nevi'im, that Eliyahu is leaving. Got it? Everyone knows it, but it's sort of hush hush. Now, what's the big question? I'll just do this without saying. Everyone knows Eliyahu's leaving. What's the big question? Who's going to be his successor? Now, there's yeshiva in Beit El with 50 Nevi'im, right? 50 B'nai Nevi'im. There's yeshiva in Yericho, got it? There's yeshiva up in the couple. There's B'nai Nevi'im all over the place. And the question is, who's going to succeed Eliyahu? Now, who's the candidate? Elisha, right? But if you know the story, Elisha and Eliyahu they don't get along so well from the first time they meet. Elisha has a mind of his own. Eliyahu says, "Come join me." And what's Elisha say? "Oh, wait a minute, I got to take care of my parents. I got to, I mean, do you have a job to become chief rabbi and what? You care about you have to worry about kibbud av va'em? Where are your priorities?" And that's exactly Elisha. It was, basic priorities of honoring his parents and taking care of them precedes, all, the famous chazal that if there's a little mitzvah to do and someone tells you Mashiach's coming, dump Mashiach and take care of the little mitzvah. If you know that approach, it's the same idea here with Elisha. But either way, the question is, will Elisha succeed him? Now, it's not a question who it's going to be. It's a question of derech. It's a question of policy. Because what's Eliyahu's policy? Midat Hadin. What's Elisha's policy? We'll see Midat Rachamim. Except maybe in the first story. Now, and they get to Yericho, remember? And what's Eliyahu telling Elisha all the time? Basically, get lost. It seems like Eliyahu doesn't want Elisha to follow, but Elisha insists. Now, as they're leaving, they cross the Jordan in a miraculous way, with the crosses it. And what's the last thing that what's Eliyahu ask Elisha? What do you want from me? What does Elisha ask for? Who remembers?
Wants the kefel. He wants to do double what he has, or
he wants Pishnayim, right?
Kiflaim.
People say that he does twice as many miracles. When you count the miracles, he does twice as many. That's cute. I don't think that's shot. Pishnayim. Who gets Pishnayim? The question is, when he says, I want Pishnaim, it means I want to be your successor.
Bechor
He
gets
wants to be
Pishnai.
this, that's just, he wants double of all the other people, meaning he wants to be the successor and the leader of all the Bnei Nevi'im. And what's Eliyahu say? I don't know. That's a hard question, but I'll give you a test. What? If you see me being taken away, that's a sign you're my successor. You know, if you see me, if you don't see me, that's a sign you're not. And guess what happens? He sees Eliyahu. That's a test. Eliyahu isn't sure if he's really the successor. And Eliyahu tells him, if you see me being taken away in this miraculous way, that's a sign that God's with you. And that's what happens. Now,
why isn't he sure? God told him to appoint.
God told David he's king, and David isn't sure until it actually happens, isn't he?
Okay.
No, he's nominated, but things can change. You can win the nomination and not necessarily run for president if things change in the meantime. That was a bad example. But if you understand my nomination, what God tells Eliyahu, he's a nominee. Eliyahu has doubts because Elisha's derech is very different. I gave you a successor, and the question who's the right person to succeed. Even Moshe isn't sure who the successor is going to be. He tells God to appoint somebody. God tells him at the very end, take Yoshua. But it's not clear who the successor, who needs to be the successor. It's clear that Eliyahu isn't sure. He didn't say no, but he's not sure whether he's the guy for it. Now, when he comes back, he takes the Ader Eliyahu that fell, and miraculously he crosses the water. Remember when they crossed the Jordan? And who sees that? The Nevi'im in Yericho see what happens. And what happens? They accept Elisha as a successor. And he does a miracle for them, correct? Who doesn't see that? The Nevi'im in Beit El. When Elisha is accepted by the Nevi'im in Yericho, when he walked up the mountain range and gets to Beit El, they didn't see what's happening. What do the people in Beit El say? What do the Nevi'im in Beit El? The first they're called Nevi'im, then they're called Yeladim, or Narim, and then Nevi'im. Yeah. It sounds like they're making fun because he's bald. But that's not what they're saying. They're not making fun of him because he's bald. Right? People make fun of bald people, but they're B'nai Nevi'im. Who is known for his long hair? If you sing Zmiras Mitzvah Shabbos, you know, or if you read the story of Achav, you know, right? Who is known for the long hair?
Eliyahu.
Eliyahu. It says so when they're looking for him. He's described when they send out to look for Eliyahu. He's the guy with the long hair. Eliyahu is known for his long hair. Elisha is known for being bald. By calling Elisha Kirech, what are they saying? You're not Eliyahu. Got it? They're not making fun of the fact that he's bald. They're basically saying you're not Eliyahu, and basically saying we don't accept you as a successor. Why? They're Beit Shammai, not Beit Hillel. Understand what I'm getting at? Right? The Bnei Nevi'im in Beit El are keeping the same line, hard Midat Hadin line of Eliyahu. They don't want Elisha. They don't like Elisha's derech. And Elisha doesn't want Elisha curses the situation. He's upset. Afterwards, he'll be Mr. Nice Guy. Does Elisha really want them all dead? I don't think so. But that's God's decision. Or God sends, how to understand that story about, because I'll say there weren't lo dubim v'lo yar. It's a more of a thematic story, but that's the whole situation. How to understand that whole nevuah or that whole story. But in a nutshell, the Nevi'im and Elisha who see that God is with Elisha accept him. The Nevi'im and Beit El don't accept him. It's all there to show you that there's a deep machloket over what should be the derech of Nevi'im. Meaning, what approach you use. The hard line, Midat Hadin, make people suffer unless they're religious, or Mr. Nice Guy. From that story on, every single story, what's Elisha doing? He's saving people with water, isn't he? The war against Aram, remember when they're dying of thirst. He does a miracle and water comes, they have what to drink. And then there's all these people. We'll deal with this next week and we'll tie it up together. But Elisha is going to have a totally different derech. And little by little, he's going to rebuild confidence, what's called V'yesh Navi b'Yisrael. Now, people can believe that Nevi'im have superpowers and they're from God, but they can hate them. The question, can I have a Navi who the people identify with and support because of his acts of kindness? And that'll be Elisha. but we'll see. In a nutshell, we'll do this next week. Despite all this, things go bad under Elisha as well for the kings. There's why things go bad, why things go better. What should have happened when Achab died, or when we'll deal with that, or with Yehu's revolt next week. But what I tried to get across today was to understand this transition from Eliyahu to Elisha. What was the reason for the battle, and what was the reason for, God's trying his best with other Nevi'im to get the people to like God, but the people, because of these 3 years of famine, the people are really angry with Eliyahu, even though they believe in God. They don't identify with the religion. It's going to take a whole another generation, almost like a decade or two, with the new type of leadership, a new type of Nevi'im, and to get and Achav's kids not being like their father, to get a people's revolt to finally get rid of the Baal and Izebel. And what Eliyahu wanted to accomplish in 3 years of a harsh famine, God will accomplish through a set of events that we'll have to see next week. Okay, we'll stop here. I'll take questions real fast. Eliyahu chat. So chat is Kol Madaka. Very good. Okay, Sounds of Silence. That's a different song. Okay, again, I'm assuming you know these stories. I went through them really fast because I'm assuming you're familiar with them, especially if you did this with Natty. But these are all famous Eliyahu stories. If you're coming to my class, I'm sure you've read this stuff before. So I'm trying to give you the bigger picture of what's going on at the bookway. And I need to explain why these Nevi'im, all of a sudden I'm going from kings to prophets. You follow? Because I'm inserting a topic of prophecy that's key to understanding like the nature of prophecy all through Sefer Malachim. And it'll be one of the underlying reasons why things go bad. In other words, the question is, when you're a prophet representing God, and there's different methods of representing God and putting people in the right direction, do you use harsh tools, or do you use tools of din, or tools of rachamim? And what happened with Am Yisrael in the desert? What did God start with? With din, and we end up with rachamim. Remember, first luchot and second luchot. It's going to be a pattern all through Tanakh, and it's not a question. So you need a blend of the two, but din alone isn't good, and rachamim alone won't be enough. You need the blend between them, and they'll see the blend between Eliyahu and Elisha. Okay, any questions real fast? Real slow? We're good? Already. Okay, Rabbi J?
Okay, thank you. Okay, please God, we'll see you next week as the summer kind of comes to an end, I guess, here in North America, Labor Day weekend. And everybody, okay, because you should hear good news. Dr. Benny Gesundheit, of course, bod 35 dakot, Shir Shalom Bivrit al Sefer Tehillim. This week, what do I have? Wednesday, Adina Blaustein, Thursday, Shuli Mishkin, our Parsha Shir, my Siddur Shir, and then we'll send out, hopefully within the next day or two, our expanded Elul schedule. So invite a friend. We look forward to learning with you. Everybody be well, and we should hear good things, and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.